L'éducation est la clé d'un monde meilleur. C'est pourquoi je vais vous inviter à nous rejoindre avec des pas de danse pour montrer au monde le pouvoir de l'éducation. Notre chanson Magique d'hier que vous connaissez a été réinterprétée par l'occasion avec l'UNESCO pour inviter tout le monde à nous rejoindre et faire des vagues pour dire que l'éducation est une priorité. Education in the air, pour un avenir meilleur. Education in the air, pour un avenir meilleur. Education pour un avenir meilleur.
You're very welcome to join in as well.
Let me put on my teacher hat for a little bit and invite everyone to please stand up. Yes, go
Yes,
ahead,
please.
stretch your legs, and let's play the music. Please clap your hands to the music, right?
Let's get some energy in the room. Yes, Ilan?
Yes.
Let's get some energy in the room.
Music.
Salut, je suis Assalfo du groupe Magic System, ambassadeur de bonne volonté de l'UNESCO. L'éducation est la clé d'un monde meilleur. C'est pourquoi je vais vous inviter à nous rejoindre avec des pas de danse pour montrer au monde le pouvoir de l'éducation. Notre chanson Magique d'hier que vous connaissez a été réinterprétée par l'occasion avec l'UNESCO pour inviter tout le monde à nous rejoindre et faire des vagues pour dire que l'éducation est une priorité. Education in the air, pour un avenir meilleur. Education in the air, pour un avenir meilleur. Education in the air, pour un avenir meilleur. Education in the air, pour un avenir meilleur.
Give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you so much. All right, with that amazing energy, we are now ready to launch the 2024 Global Education Monitoring Report on Leadership in Education. I would like to invite the session speakers to come on stage. First of all, Mr. Manos Antoninis, Director of the Global Education Monitoring Report. Let's give him a warm welcome. Director of the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, Ms. Silvia Montoya. Mayor of Sobral, Brazil, Mr. Ivo Gomez. Minister of Education for Ecuador, Alegria Crespo Cordovez. Yes. Minister of State for National Education and New Citizenship for the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Raisa Malu Dinanga. School Principal, Liup Elementary School in the United States of America, Ryan T. Chi. And lastly, our moderator for this panel, Editor-in-Chief of the Hatchinger Report, Liz Willen. Let's give our dear panel a warm round of applause. Thank you, everyone. And we gladly give the floor to Liz Willen to please run this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is really exciting to be here with people from all over the world who care as deeply about the topic as education as I do and as my colleagues do at the Hechinger Report. We are a nonprofit news outlet based in New York City, and it's just a thrill to hear from so many of you about what you do to make lives of children better all over the world with education. So welcome to the global launch. And I feel like we should be dancing a little bit again after all of that. And thank you for joining us, and for all of you who are joining us online as well. If you are, use the hashtag #LeadForLearning and react to the findings that you hear today. So leadership, it's such an enormous topic for us as journalists in the United States. It's absolutely why we feel so strongly about being in classrooms and on campuses and visiting schools all over the country, and when we can, all over the world. Because this is the most important part of what you do. And here we have on stage some of the most innovative leaders in the world. And all of you are discussing ways that education can make a difference in these really difficult and volatile times across an array of different countries and communities, coming together to talk about the vast inequality in the way countries spend money to educate their own children, or in the way that they don't, as we've heard earlier. And you've all come to discuss this crisis of inequality, the lack of funding, and potential solutions that you're working on. We try to focus a lot on solutions in our journalism, which appears in papers all over the world, from NPR to the Washington Post and the New York Times, because we feel like those issues really make a difference. It's a shared crisis of inequality, and your commonality makes you unsung heroes as leaders. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that, because education, as we know, has always been the great equalizer, in our view, at a time when the need for greater investment in education is more critical than ever, as the latest report we're discussing shows. But none of it can happen without strong leaders. And that's why we're here to shine the light on the role and impact of leaders throughout education systems, with a nod to the GEM's report's latest global review of progress. I want to recognize everyone in the room who's helped contribute to this report. Setting targets, as you're doing while contributing to the SDG 4 national benchmarking process, is like setting a vision. It's the first step in demonstrating political leadership, no matter what country you are representing. So we're going to first start by watching a short animation to introduce the theme of this year's GEM report.
What does great education leadership look like? We all know that school leaders have a lot going on. They are architects, designing good learning environments. They are conductors, getting everyone to play in harmony. They're gardeners, cultivating potential. And coaches, pushing teams towards excellence. On top of that, they are counselors, accountants, and problem solvers. A focus on results makes them data officers and evaluators too. But when can they focus on learning? The part of the job that turns schools around. It's a superhuman task. But being a leader isn't about being a hero. Effective leaders recognize their limitations and build strong teams. And yet only a third of countries train them to share responsibilities with others. The latest Global Education Monitoring Report shows us that leading for learning is about collaboration. Students, teachers, parents, and the wider community working together to create thriving schools. Leadership is in education departments and ministries too. They build their team from communities who they've inspired around their goals. They set expectations, and they support school leaders to make reform happen in schools. The challenges facing education are increasing, and leadership can't be taken for granted. By providing support, trust, and recognition, we can empower education leaders to drive positive change.
Thank you. I am now going to introduce, and he's been on the stage several times already, Manos Antoninis, the GEM Report's director, for the first ever presentation of the new GEM report. Manos.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me very well? Thank you so much for being here with us today for the launch of the 2024-25 Global Education Monitoring Report. And thank you for the warm reception that you are giving the report over the years that gives us the energy to continue in our efforts. I think I will need now to get into the case. Thank you also to UNESCO for bringing the Global Education Monitoring Report to the Global Education Meeting. It's a happy coincidence that we can do that for the first time. You will hear in the presentation that will follow from Silvia Montoya, the director of the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, that's providing the bulk of the data that supports the monitoring part of the report, and with which we share the responsibility for monitoring progress and reporting to you on progress towards SDG 4, that there is a long list of things to do. And this long list of things to do is actually setting the backdrop to the report that focuses this year on leadership. This graph just shows 3 examples. You'll hear more from Silvia in a minute of where we're actually falling behind. The left-hand side graph actually comes from one of the major sources of information on learning outcomes. It's the PISA survey of the OECD. And it shows that in the last 12 years, in the last 10 years, since 2012, learning levels, the percentage of students who meet the minimum proficiency in reading has fallen by 12 percentage points. Less than half in middle and high-income countries achieve this minimum level. You also see that this is a trend that precedes COVID-19. You see in mathematics, we have also seen a decline of 6 percentage points on the right hand. You heard from Stefania earlier in her introductory speech that the number of children out of school has stagnated, only 1% less since 2015. And you'll hear more, especially tomorrow, about how far behind we're falling when it comes to financing. Despite these major challenges, and despite the fact that there are more children and young people enrolling in universities and in schools, about almost 10% in middle-income countries, as you see in the middle of the third graph, the prioritization that governments are giving to education is falling since 2015 by more than 1 percentage point, because countries are under pressure. With so many challenges, we therefore need leadership in education. And in this report, we interpret leadership very broadly. We cover all levels, within schools, at the school level, at the system level, at the political level, and with that we mean not only ministers and parliamentarians, but also all the interest groups, the student unions, the teacher unions, the business unions and leaders and associations, but also all those who provide ideas and who also hold governments to account for the commitments they've made and how they're delivering. Because at the end of the day, leadership in education, and that's how this report defines it, is a process of influence. Influence that tries to mobilize people to act together towards a goal. And how these goals are shaped is, of course, an issue of leadership. But the report also reminds us that actually there are a lot of leadership styles and a lot of education outcomes that we are trying to achieve. Sometimes we lose track of how leaders help. And also we tend to get carried away by stories of charismatic individuals. And yet this report makes the call that we have not been giving sufficient interest and sufficient attention to preparing, selecting, bringing to the profession education leaders. We need processes in place to pursue these careers, retain them, and give them the opportunity to act. Now, what do schools and system leaders do? You also heard yesterday from the Minister of Education of Brazil that there are 4 essential leadership dimensions that need to be nurtured. The first is that leaders need to set expectations, need to set the vision, need to provide us with a direction where we're going. The second is a focus on learning. And it's remarkable how until recently, especially school leaders, were just seen as administrators dealing with the day-to-day stuff. But actually there's a broader mission to achieve, and that is to improve learning outcomes. And there's a broad range of learning outcomes to achieve, not only those that are much more easily measurable. The third is to foster collaboration. You'll hear in a minute, no one can do all these things on their own. It only happens when you exchange, when you listen, respond, discuss, and agree and action together, and empower people to do that. And the fourth is developing people. Of course, you develop the children, but you also need to develop your teams. to succeed. It is well known from studies that have happened primarily in the United States, I mentioned it's quite difficult to assess the impact of leadership, that school leaders, effective school leaders, account for more than a quarter of the differences in learning outcomes of students. That's the second most important factor after teachers. And we also know that studies across multiple countries have shown that effective school leadership has an impact on improved teaching practices. So we know they have a major role to play. So where does this leave us? What do we need to do? The report has 4 recommendations. The first recommendation is the need to trust and empower leaders, to create the enabling conditions for them to be able to improve education. The first 3 recommendations focus primarily on school leaders. Leaders need to have the opportunity to take decisions. It is true that there are very different contexts. There are school leaders who need to exercise leadership under very restricted conditions, financial, but also the rules under which they play. But leadership's influence is much greater when they have the trust and the ability to take decisions. That's when they can exercise their skills. And yet, we find that almost 40% of countries, for example, do not recognize higher education institutions' autonomy in their laws. And that, of course, ties their hands. Because autonomy is only the first step. We need to think of supports to that. Roles need to be clear. Often, they're not. Resources need to be adequate, timely, predictable, and equitable. And with autonomy, we need to have accountability about the use of these resources and also accountability to achieve feasible outcomes, because sometimes expectations are excessive and we need to avoid that, because in countries that have implemented accountability to a strict extent, what we see is also very high levels of stress, burnout among school leaders, and that is something to be avoided. But we know overall that the more autonomy principals have, the higher in the country, the higher that country is ranked in terms of mathematics outcomes, for example. So it is an avenue to pursue. The second recommendation is to select, develop, and recognize school leaders as professionals. It is time to invest in the professionalization of school principals. And that starts with selection, with recruitment. We find that only 62% of countries are actually applying open and competitive processes for recruiting school leaders in primary and secondary education. That means in a lot of countries, such processes are not available, and that puts off many people with talent and potential to apply for these roles. The second issue that we need to keep in mind when we recruit is that, yes, it is absolutely essential to appoint teachers in these positions. You cannot be a principal without being a teacher. But the best teachers do not make the best principals, and that's something we often forget. So selection criteria need to be broadened. In fact, only about 1 in 3 countries are specifying management experience as a prerequisite for applying for such a position. That needs to increase because, as you'll hear also later in the video, management skills are really extremely important, and not all teachers have them. Development is very important, the training. I mentioned 4 fundamental dimensions of what it means to be a school leader, and yet we find that at most 1 in 5 training programs, pre-service or in-service, emphasize all 4 of these dimensions at the same time. There's a lot of work to do to improve these programs so that they're relevant. And we also know that even in the richest countries in the world, only half of the principals are trained before they start the profession. Only 30% of countries globally, according to our review of laws and policies around the world, which you can find on the PEER website, have induction programs for leaders. The challenge is that with all that has to be done, we don't often protect leaders' time to focus on what matters most, which is learning. A study of 14 middle-income countries showed that 68% of time of school principals is spent on administrative tasks. And even in high-income countries, we find that principals have been reducing the time they dedicate to supervising teaching, which should have been one of their primary responsibilities. The implementation of standards is a recommendation. Of course, almost half of countries do have standards, and these help in the sense that they can provide guidance. They can actually make sure that principals' attention focuses not just on administration, but on the bigger function. They can also help communicate the national priorities, and they can also be used to guide what I was mentioning earlier about selection and development of principles. But we should be careful with these standards. Often, there is a tendency to import them to countries, but they should reflect the country's national and cultural contexts and be used as a formative tool, not as a tool to sanction. The final recommendation on school principles is sharing. It is really important to share leadership and to promote cultures of collaboration. You heard already in the little animation that we showed that, and that could have even been the title of the report, do we need another hero? School leaders should not be heroes. They should recognize where they need help and work with others to achieve their objectives, which are common at the end of the day. So that means including assistant principals, teacher leaders, other teachers, school staff, parents, community members, and the students. And yet, we find that only half of countries in the standards that I just described include collaboration as one of the core elements of those standards. Finally, the report I mentioned is not only about school leadership, because the same objectives and the same roles really apply to civil servants who work at local and central government level, people we describe in the report as system leaders. The little chart here is just one example of an illustration of a district education office structure in a middle-income country. And for those of you who have worked there, you often realize that when you visit, these people are even more consumed by the bureaucracy and less focused on the impact they are going to have on schools. And yet these people are those who will be able to link the reform objectives of the government with the school needs. These need to be aligned, and this alignment passes through these people. We also know that local governments that have more autonomy, just like leaders, are also those that have achieved better outcomes. And I was mentioning reforms because all ministers that come to the job come with high aspirations to achieve, to contribute, to get their countries moving forward. And yet analysis that this report shows of a database of education ministers since 2010 shows that within the first 2 years, more than half of ministers are no longer in position. That makes it ever more stressful and challenging for them to deliver. Short tenures make it much more difficult to implement reform. A good analysis of a World Bank project that compared the performance according to the tenure of the ministers showed that, in fact, there were worse outcomes when turnover was higher. So school leaders, political leaders need skills to be able to compromise, to reach out, to collaborate, as I was mentioning earlier. Coalition and relationship building are essential. And finally, let's not forget that there are so many other leaders that we need to bring together to make reforms based on consensus and therefore more likely to succeed. The interest groups, those who are generating ideas and evidence, those holding decision makers to account for the commitment. That brings me to the end of the presentation. I just want to mention that there are so many education outcomes that we want to achieve, and to give a sense of how broad these outcomes are and how leaders can be effective, we have structured our upcoming regional editions along these different goals. We will have an edition on Central and Eastern Europe, the Caucasus and Central Asia, coming out in February, that will focus on the challenge that we heard in the previous session, inclusion in education. How do you prepare school leaders to instill an inclusive ethos in schools? We will then follow with this region, Latin America, and the issue of sharing, distributed leadership. How can we make school leaders collaborate in their communities to make the running of the school more effective? That will come in April, in partnership with the Organization of Ibero-American States. In June, we'll turn our attention to East Asia, and we will try to link the previous report on technology and education and ask the question, how do school leaders get prepared to implement these extremely ambitious digital transformation reforms? And that is a question that we identify in the literature having been really underemphasized. Finally, we turn to Africa and the third edition of our Spotlight series, where we look at how school leaders and system leaders in African countries are being prepared and supported to focus on instructional leadership for foundational learning. And I would say that this is also the last report that has been following a theme, an explicit theme. I just want to advertise and mention and draw your attention that the three reports that will follow between now and 2030 will be part of a series called Countdown to 2030. We will draw attention of the international community to countries that have made rapid progress, but also countries that have made no progress or even regressed in three broad areas of education: participation, learning outcomes, and the relationship with education and other development goals. And that brings me to the end. We really look forward to your support using the hashtag #LeadForLearning.
Thank you so
really
much,
important.
Manos. Thank you. Thank you so much. We have these inspiring leaders that I'm dying to hear from, and many of you are, but much of the information we have about the health of education worldwide comes from the UNESCO Institute for Statistics. So I'm going to introduce the Institute's director, Sylvia Montoyo, to talk us through, and then we'll talk to some of these leaders. And that was both bleak and yet inspiring simultaneously. So thank you, Manos.
Having the opportunity to be with you, and I will present to you a brief account of where the world stands at the midpoint towards 2030 in SDG 4. This has been prepared based on the joint work of the UNESCO Institute for Statistics and the Global Education Monitoring Report. That is the tool, the scorecard, to monitor the progress toward the national SDG 4 benchmarks. In 2014, the UN Secretary General had implored countries to embrace a culture of shared responsibility, that is to benchmark for progress. In education in 2015, the 2030 Framework for Action, countries agreed to set national benchmarks for selected indicators. In 2021, the same global education meeting has commissioned UNESCO through the high-level steering committee to coordinate the operationalization of this decision. The idea is that to set targets at 100% was unfair to countries who are starting from a lowest point, and it's actually not helping us to showcase the cases where those countries are making effort to have to try to excel and to make progress towards their own national targets. The indicators you can see are indicators that are 7 indicators that convey the information that any ministry, any Minister of Education, any Ministry of Education should have, and is aimed to strengthen the country commitment towards achieving SDG 4. By 2024, 9 in 10 countries has already participated in the process. The benchmarking process, as you could see in the last slide, in the last column, is also used as a basis for following up on the Transformation Education Summit global commitments, with the intention to actually have the test as an integral part of SDG 4 and not a parallel mechanism, and also to have concrete measurable commitment for each of the global initiatives. And allow me to start by out-of-school children. As Stefania has announced, we have launched today new numbers in all our dissemination platforms, and we can see that since 2015, 100 million children and youth are more in school, and countries are also committed, as you could see in the slide, by the green light, to reduce this out-of-school children rate by 2030. We can see that the trend is actually more ambitious than the observed trend, which is represented by the blue line. In terms of numbers, it means that out-of-school children are at the 251, a reduction of only 1% with respect to 2015. But also we can see that there are systematic cases that the regions are above the global rate, and we can see in the graph that Sub-Saharan Africa for all levels is actually above in terms of the rate. That means that by demographic trend, this means that 12 million more children and youth are out of school. These numbers are also, I have to clarify, that are likely to be underestimated, the conflict-affected countries counting. But children are not only aimed to be in school, they should be aiming to complete the different levels of a school. And we have seen and actually shared from Manos' presentation, the completion rate for all levels has increased, and we can see in the figure again that countries are setting targets that are more ambitious than the observed trend, which is in blue. We see that the green line that's represented by the national commitments are actually upwards, they are ambitious, and we can see also there has been an increase from 49% to 54% in this case for upper secondary. In terms of numbers, it means that 40 million more children are completing lower secondary school. But we have to call attention to the fact that 650 million youth live without having a secondary school certificate. It's also showing that despite this ambition, by 2030 still, we will only have 7 out of 10 youth completed secondary school, even if the countries are achieving their national benchmarks. But let me turn to learning. The children have to be in school, have to complete the level, but also have to achieve meaningful learning outcomes. Still, we can see that at the moment of the scorecard, when it was released, it was a slight increase in the level of learning shown by the blue line in the screen, which actually showing a slight increase from 2015. The numbers that I actually have shared by Manos show that despite this good news that we're having at that moment, new information is actually showing that the minimum proficiency level in reading at the end of primary have gone down 3 percentage points in richer countries, and still we don't have information in low and middle income countries, which I will come back in the next slide. In middle and high income countries, between 2012 and 2022, as we just have heard, levels in lower secondary has fallen both in reading and in mathematics. In sub-Saharan Africa, at most 2 in 10 children are achieving the minimum proficiency level at the end of primary. But actually, there are no news about more than half of the school-age population, because the orange and the red in that figure are actually representing the areas for which we do not have data. And just to put this in perspective, with an estimate of the UIS of the school-age population in 1.7 billion children and youth, this means in a very rough counting that actually we're not having information about the achievement of a basic human right, which is a minimum proficiency level, for almost approximately 1 billion of children and youth. We simply do not have information. And I would like also to try to make the long story short, to remind that we are measuring education outcomes since 2048 with the first Human Rights Declaration, when it was set that the standard of achievement for all countries and nations, that education was started to be measuring, and UNESCO since then has led and paved the way to measuring in learning. Learning is a basic human right, and we are not having information for almost 1 billion children and youth in the planet. And let me turn to early childhood. Early childhood still is starting by a high level. We still see that the commitment of the countries, the green light, is ambitious to try to achieve 9 out of 10 children 1 year before primary education, but the bad news is that rate has stagnated. But always there is good news to actually to transfer, and the reality is that the 2 regions who are below the global average, Sub-Saharan Africa and Western Asia, are actually showing an increase in 4 percentage points since 2015, so they are actually reaching that average. The other dimension we want to call attention in 3 areas is the equity. We're looking, taking as a parity as a reference, everything below that line of parity showing the disadvantage, that is still in gender, we're having a parity that is actually against women. Only 7 out of 10 are achieving the upper secondary completion. We also see that this is an advantage to be in a rural location versus a urban location. And we also can see that it's very difficult to achieve a good level of completion in low and middle income countries, where the richest are 5 times more likely to complete secondary education than the poorest. That means that only 5 out of 10 children are achieving upper secondary education in this context. And then there is an indication that is about learning environment that is related to one of the global initiatives in the test, which is actually showing connectivity in different levels. We're seeing primary education. This benchmark indicator is showing that the countries are committed to actually in the green light, to increase the trend of connectivity of schools. The bad news, to some extent, are actually unsurprisingly that the share of countries that are achieving fast progress are the ones who are the high-income countries that are close to 95%. And just to conclude, let me wrap up by saying that we have actually flagged that these national benchmarks are about monitoring progress that is context-specific, so it's actually trying to be more ambitious than business as usual, but also related to the national situation of the countries. It is clear that there is ambition, because we have seen that always the green light is showing a more ambitious trend in terms of the observed data. But also, let me share with you the little bit of a not good news about what is shared. That ambition is not enough. And let me pick two indicators. At the business of usual trend, the one we're observing, we just can see that the upper secondary completion, the target set by the national benchmark, 7 out of 10 children, will be achieved only in 2043. And then the universal target that is set by the SDG agenda is going to be achieved only in 2065. And if we go to learning, with the information we have, actually the numbers are more daunting. We can see that we just need almost one generation to achieve the values that are set by the target, that is only going to be in 2081. It's 60 years for today. And then if we want to achieve the SDG target, which is the universal target of 100%, we are going to be needed more than a century. That means that I can tell my 3 children that eventually their great-grandchildren might be able to achieve their minimum proficiency level at the end of primary education. And in closing, I would like to express my gratitude for the support and to ratify the commitment of the UNESCO Institute for Statistics and the Global Education Monitor Report teams to update the international community annually on the progress toward these benchmarks to our joint scorecard report. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I saw so many issues here around the world that we're also facing in the United States, declining enrollment and post-pandemic score plummets. A lot of what we heard today is kind of depressing, but what's exciting to me is that we have some great panelists here, 2 ministers of education, one from Ecuador and the other from the Democratic Republic of Congo, who have had a lot of success and are doing some really exciting things in their countries. It is their leadership we're highlighting today. And I'm going to turn first to Allegra Crespo Cordovez. She's the Minister of Education from Ecuador, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about your vision for education in the country, and what are you trying to change, and how is it working out for you so far?
Hello, everybody. Good morning. Bon dia. Buenos dias. My name is Alegría Crespo. That means happiness. So I'm trying to be a happy minister, although in Ecuador, as in Latin America, we can identify a lot because we have kind of the same problems, okay? I'm going to speak in English since I think it's more global for everyone, so I'm going to practice it with you. Well, I've been an education lover, and I think that in this field of human science, you need to love education. That's the first step, to try to take the right decisions. Of course, based on data, based on numbers, based on research. That's, for me, is a basic need to make the right steps. I've been a minister only for 6 months now, but I think that since I've been working in education for 25 years, I know what my vision and my team's vision is. And one of those aspects, I'm going to focus, we've been doing a lot of things, but I'm going to focus on 5 insertions that we made to the curricula to the national Ecuadorian curricula. I don't want to change it till we have all the data to make a strong reform. But that is one of the problems in Latin America, that we want to make huge changes, and sometimes we kind of disorder the education system. So what I decided to do, instead of changing a curricula, was strengthen it through insertion. One of those is citizenship, ethics, and integrity as a subject. We are talking about values. We are singing our national anthem with pride. We are really giving a lot of importance to good habits that maybe were natural when we were kids. But now you can see that kids sometimes, they are not guilty, they are not guilty of what's going on in this crazy world. We are responsible. Sometimes kids don't even say hello or say good morning because we are losing values. I'm not going to be a passive minister knowing that this is happening. So we are talking a lot about values. That's one of my insertions. We are, this is a practice every Monday, 10 minutes. We are singing our anthem, talking about values. I want my kids to be organized, to be well-behaved. And since we are, introducing this beautiful subject, you have to practice it as the adult. You have to practice it as the teacher. So we are more than ever being example. Now we can talk about everything else. The next 4 insertions, quickly, one is financial education. The other one is socio-emotional education to take care of our souls, minds, especially after pandemics. Then road safety education. And the last one is sustainability education. So those 5 insertions are fostering our minds, our kids' minds and hearts. And that hasn't been that difficult, and it doesn't require a lot of budget. It requires a lot of capacitation for our teachers. It requires a lot of revalorization or revalue for our teachers to feel that they really are the hope to change the world. And I think that's one of my actions that I really wanted to share with you, since I'm an advocated teacher that thinks that this is really important for school, for families, and for societies. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alegria. I apologize about the name. That's an ambitious agenda. And we're going to hear from Risa Malu Dinanga, Minister of State for National Education and New Citizenship in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a physicist by training, professor and author. And I know you have a lot of experience in science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM. What vision are you having right now for education and improving it in your country?
Merci beaucoup. Avant tout, je voudrais remercier le Brésil et en particulier l'État de Ceará pour le chaleureux accueil et l'UNESCO pour l'invitation. Alors, la vision du président de la République, donc le chef de l'État, son Excellence M. Félix Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo, est en fait de faire de l'éducation un pilier de notre développement national. Alors évidemment, dans le cas de notre pays, les défis sont nombreux, notamment en matière d'infrastructure, de gouvernance et de mobilisation de ressources. Alors, les disparités géographiques, l'accès aux ressources numériques et le renforcement de la formation des enseignants sont encore pour nous des obstacles majeurs. Cependant, mon parcours académique que vous avez rappelé, mon expérience dans l'enseignement, m'ont préparé en fait à naviguer dans ces défis avec une approche rigoureuse et collaborative en valorisant les partenariats stratégiques pour assurer évidemment une mise en œuvre efficace et durable des réformes que nous allons faire au sein de notre système éducatif. Alors, mon objectif en tant que ministre de l'Éducation nationale et de la nouvelle citoyenneté et d'instaurer une culture éducative qui prépare nos jeunes non seulement à réussir dans ce monde qui est de plus en plus technologique, mais aussi à s'engager activement dans la construction, et c'est pour moi quelque chose d'important, vraiment dans la construction d'une société plus juste et résiliente. Donc voilà comment je vois les choses en tant que ministre de l'Éducation nationale, et donc ça va faire 4 mois que je suis à ce poste. Merci.
Thank you. Another ambitious agenda, and we're going to move a little closer to home right now because, as Manos reminded us, leaders at the local level can also help align whole systems behind one giant goal, becoming and creating conditions for school leaders to become successful and setting clear direction and tone. And much has been written right here about what happened in nearby Brazil. This municipality of Sobral turned around its education system to become one of the highest performing in the country. And so we're lucky to have Sobral's current mayor and former Secretary of Education in Fortaleza, Mayor Ivo Gomes, and he's going to talk us through how, as a leader, he supported this enormous change. What did you do? What lessons can the rest of us learn?
I guess I have 3 minutes for all that, right? So good morning for all of you who have not had lunch yet. Good afternoon for those who have. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. It's an honor for me personally and for the city of Sobral to be in this important event. As it was said before, I come from Sobral, which is a city here in the state of Ceará, 200 kilometers from here where we are. So you're very welcome to be there. Just, you can leave in the morning and come back in the afternoon, so you'll be more than welcome to be there. I'm the mayor of Sobral for the next 2 months. So in the next 2 months, I'll be unemployed, so available for, for invitations. And since I'm in Brazil, in my state and close to my town, I'm going to ask you guys to speak in Portuguese. May I? Thank you very much. Em Sobral, que é uma cidade de 220 mil habitantes, nós começamos há 20 e poucos anos profundo processo de reforma na educação.
Transformation of education, because we believe that poor children in the peripheries and in the ghettos of the cities are not destined to be unsuccessful because of their lack of capacity to grow and learn. So the mobilizing transformation of Sobral was that dependent of children's socioeconomic situation. They should have access. History has proven, and we were right, when we take children from the periphery. We went from 160 in Brazil in the ranking of education, and it's been 10 years that we've been leading the ranking of Brazilian national education rankings. So one of the main measures, if not the most important measure that was taken in Sobral, was establishing transparent criteria, Republican transparent criteria for recruiting school directors, deans. What we see globally around Brazil has 5,000 municipalities, 5,500, and in other countries that we've been to, that we visited, and that we have shared experiences and practices with, what we see is that the smashing majority of municipalities, school deans and directors, usually are the main leaders of that school. They are the main players of the school, and they're chosen by criteria which is subpar and not transparent. To not say that they're chosen by totally political criteria. So Sobral chose to, some time ago, change its criteria and establish a criteria of its own. We believe that 2 criteria are the most transparent. So Ceará and its schools adopts a system of election for our deans and directors. That's usually what happens around the country. In Sobral, we chose something else, a selection process. It's a very complex, long selection and respectful public selection process. So this consists of participating in a written test, a test which takes about 6 months. So it takes about 6 months for us to hire a school dean, a school director, a leader for that school. So first they go and take a test, general knowledge, of course, which they need to be good at, and then their knowledge of legislation, Brazilian law and education, and then pedagogy, because school deans are not only administrators of buildings and of resources, they are the leaders of the learning and of the methodology and pedagogy of that school. They're also the main references, the shining lights to teachers in terms of how they will teach. After the dean passes that test, all candidates to the job will be submitted to a special course, including leadership, how to deal with problems in practice, how to behave ethically. Then they're nominated to the schools and have autonomy to implement their mission, which is assure the reaching of the goals. So we can't just give them autonomy without giving them the necessary resources. So schools receive their monthly budgets so that they don't need to depend of central administration to solve small problems, for example, maintenance problems in the building. They have their own budget for that. And permanent continued education. So the Secretariat of Education has a superintendency which takes care of the deans and school directors, which are their partners in the school system for administrative and technological and educational issues. I think that's my time, unfortunately.
There's enough here to talk to each one of you for hours and hours. It's fascinating. But I'd be remiss if I didn't introduce Ryan Shee. He is coming to us from Flagstaff, Arizona. He's a school principal there, and what he's doing in an area where Native Americans are really behind in college going, which is a big problem in the United States, is really remarkable. I'd love to hear more about how your leadership informs your vision and how you're making that happen in Arizona.
Testing. Afternoon. If I would please take a minute to introduce myself in Navajo. I am Navajo Native American from Arizona. Ya'ate do ahehe ade shikedo shiden ahehen sengo edi shchenkoni hetka ehwenshlo. Yin shiheki a Ryan Tom Chi a yin shie. Kintle chitni the ne ainshle. Ado hashkahat zoho a bashchin. Clash che dashnale. Kenya ani a dashche do dashmasana. Ekut ego a the nenshle. Ado Loop Arizona hol yede ado a yise h ishike. Ilkin shnani sto a Lucretia Chi will ye. A Dilcon, Arizona, Holiede, H. Ebeke, Dishkon hit Kahwan Sloniki, do short ego a nihit ba a hensen go a dishke, qua a nihit winslon. Thank you for that brief opportunity to introduce myself to you in Navajo. I am simply floored to be here with you and have the privilege to listen to all the wonderful topics and challenges that we collectively face throughout the world in educating our children. I am so to be here. I come to you from a small community located on the Navajo Nation, indigenous people. We still continue to speak the language, have our cultural practices, and we still live the ways of our ancestors, and we continue the tradition and the legacy of herding sheep, of tending to our dry farms, to attending to cattle. And so, in midst of all that, we have this opportunity of formal educating our families and our children. And so today I have an opportunity to share with you that wonderful story of what that looks like for our community. We are all uniquely different. We have language, we have our own upbringing, and yet that's beauty in it. And so, in my school, in my community, there's a very low percentage of us who have the ability to go to school. We have implemented college readiness program, no excuses. And that's the theme of our school each and every day. There are no excuses. You and I, collectively, coming to the school every day, we have the opportunity to build the school capacity to attend any college in the United States. The design of our school, the intent and the purposefulness is that preschool through fifth, they are all equated or they're all adopted into a university. They get to learn about that university. They get to exchange with that university. They get to visit those universities. And so when they feel and see a university in person, what a tremendous difference that has made in the conversations of our tables on the Navajo Nation. And so we have families that are collectively talking about, I want to attend ASU. I want to attend Northern Arizona University. And so we have ignited a conversation and a movement in our community and across our nation to say we can attend and attain higher education. And so it is a wonderful, wonderful implementation that we've had at our school. We have students who have come back full circle. They attended school. Mr. Chi, I'm now an engineer for Google. Mr. Chi, I am an internal pediatric surgeon at the University of Utah. And so those conversations and those highlights of successes within our school are now full circle. Last week, we just had a Navajo dentist pediatrician from the School of Harvard come and talk to our students. And so when you ignite that desire of that possibility of attending school, oh, is it contagious. Everybody wants in on it. And we have families who are now part of this wonderful journey that we call college readiness. And so today I'm so privileged and so honored to be here. And I believe it comes back to who I was and who I am, being born Native American Navajo, growing up in a dirt-floored hogan, riding horses, not ever believing that one day I'd be sitting on a stage like this and speaking to you leaders throughout the world about the importance and the opportunity that formal education brings. As I listen to the presentations, we are nation builders. You and I are in the business of nation building. And I applaud everyone who is here today for rolling up their sleeves and giving our children the utmost opportunity to be successful. Thank you for this opportunity to share.
This is amazing to sort of end on a hopeful note, but I would love to end by asking each one of you leaders to briefly tell us what advice you have for leaders, education leaders today. We heard Manos speak earlier about the need for support and training. We've heard so many different words from all of you about your challenges. But can you briefly give us some advice for the next generation of leaders based on your experience? Why don't we start down here? Manos, please.
I think the main message I already conveyed. We believe that leadership has not received the attention it deserves in policy making. The orientation that we need to give to school leaders and the resources and the decision-making power need to be strengthened if we are to see the change we need in this world.
Sylvia?
I would always thank you. I will always go, but try to keep some focus on what are the objectives and try to provide support along those lines. So I think that this is actually critical to help development forward.
Mr. Mayor, for 2 more weeks. 2 more months.
2 more months.
2 more months, sorry.
Breaking glasses brings good luck here. I would say 2 things very, very quickly. Teach kids how to read by the age of 6. That's a very difficult task of the school, but it's something that we should prioritize. And keep politicians away from the schools. Leave the schools with the principal.
We're not having any luck
I'm
with
a
that.
politician, so in democracies, only politicians can move politicians away from the schools.
We're having no luck with that in the United States at the moment, but
I'm sorry?
we're not having any luck with that in the U.S.
Yeah, I
right
know
now.
that. I hope you guys do the right thing next Tuesday.
Alegria. Let's hear from our ministers now.
Okay, I think that my advice would be to be loyal to your essence, to your voice, to your own voice. Know that every kind of success requires a lot of work, a lot of reading. Like hard work gives its benefits, and you need to work hard if you have a dream. But you need to work hard and to make the world listen to your own voice, because it's unique. Be loyal to yourself, to your values, and have this very, very clear, this path, so you can work every single day to achieve that. Or you believe all of us who are working for education like got this easily? No. It's been a long, hard road, but it's worth it. So work really, really hard for your own dreams. I hope that we have a lot of young leaders in education, because the world needs you. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 2 more quick messages of.
Pour moi, le message sera le même que celui que je donne à mes étudiants pour ces futurs leaders. C'est absolument important de garder le cœur et l'esprit ouverts et de travailler ensemble pour que l'on ait une société plus juste et inclusive. Merci.
Ryan.
We are all in the nation-building process, and we're part of the team. Our schools should reflect values of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you all so very much, and give a hand for our fantastic panel.
What is Mr. Chi's leadership style? That's a very interesting question.
How my fellow teachers describe me as a leader in 1 word: emotional.
I am Emily Chepkoech Chiruyat. I am the first female principal at Keringet.
Eu sou o Antônio José Neto, professor por formação, estou diretor desta unidade escolar, Colégio Estadual Círculo Operário.
我叫刘希亚，是重庆谢家湾学校的校长。
A minha função aqui é liderar e gerenciar todos os setores da escola, desde o pedagógico, ao administrativo, ao pessoal, todas as áreas, né?
Sometimes the number of administrative tasks is that big that I don't have time to spend with teachers and learners. In my personal opinion, pedagogical aspect of work should be the most important one, because schools are all about quality teaching and learning, or at least should be all about.
I would say the greatest challenges in terms of student learning has to do with the social ills that we take on and confront each and every day.
Implantar uma liderança não é algo fácil. Hoje é você manter o aluno na sala de aula e fazer com que ele saia daqui com um aprendizado.
Being a principal involves much more than being a teacher, and we should have some training prior to being appointed or even before being allowed to apply for the position.
Se eu pudesse ter treinamento, eu insistiria ainda na